The phone call I had with Melissa was fleeting, but better to be straight to the point. She sounded distressed and wanted me to come over to her house straight away. She must have found my details on certain message board ads that my colleague Dale posts to generate interest in our business. Melissa lived on her own and informed me that she believed her house was haunted by an old man who had been visiting her at night. I've been a medium for as long as I can remember. I have the ability to sense entities and help them move on. Dale and I experienced both real hauntings and hoaxes regularly. The legitimate cases were pretty straightforward situations where spirits had gotten lost and needed a guide to point them in the right direction. However, the majority of call-outs were time wasters, or those with faulty plumbing in old creaky houses. We have also experienced spirits who had a different agenda. It was rare, but it had happened once or twice before. Those ones are harder to forget. Dale Kennedy was my number 2. We built this partnership together a long time ago. He specialized in the technical side of the investigations, utilizing different methods of capturing occurrences with his different machines and devices. He also ran tests before I entered properties to determine if what we're dealing with was just a hoax or a legitimate case. Dale is a very kind-hearted man who has helped me a great deal throughout the years, especially when I thought I was losing my mind at times. This job can do that to a person. He would be examining Melissa's home tonight before I showed up, which was standard procedure. Melissa didn't mention what had been happening to her in great detail, but I felt an overwhelming sense of urgency and fear in her voice over the phone, even though she had a calm demeanor. I waited anxiously for Dale to call me as he was carrying out his inspections. Something told me he'd be calling me in. Hi, Dale.
Claire, you can come over now.
I'm already in the car.
Alright, I'll see you soon.
Just as I thought. The drive there was dark and misty. The moon towered over the street like a giant telescope inspecting a colony of insects. I arrived at Melissa's street and parked the car up on the curb across the road. I glanced at the windows outside her house. Dark red curtains had been drawn, disguising the old building within. I knocked on the door, and Melissa answered almost immediately. Hi, Melissa. I'm Claire. It's very nice to meet you, I said with a warm smile. Claire, hi. Please come in, she replied with a forced smile in return. This is such a lovely home, I said in awe as I walked through the front door into the living room. Thank you, Melissa mumbled while locking up. The living room was finely coated in 60s decor. The old oak wood finishings stood handsome, polished, and well-positioned. Bookcases had been organized to near perfection, and the leather furniture had no indentations or creases visible to the human eye. The smell of incense flooded my nostrils with a mystic bravado. Not a speck of dust looked like it had entered the room. Melissa kept house proud. Dale came through to the living room. He was holding a cup in one hand and one of his beeping devices in the other.
Claire, did you find the place all right?
He said, after swallowing a mouthful of coffee and turning the device off. Oh yes, no problem, Dale, I replied while looking around. Can I get you a drink? Tea will be fine, dear, thank you. Dale pulled me to one side as Melissa walked through the kitchen.
Claire, I think there's something in here. It's trying to contact me on the meter and it wants me to leave. I can feel it,
he whispered anxiously. Let's wait and see. I walked around the living room for a while and inspected all of the corners and doors. The room was huge and spacious, and I imagined the rest of the rooms were of a similar size. All of a sudden, a sense of something darker began to nip at my senses. I turned around to Dale and frowned with a knowing look.
You should see this. She taped it inside her bedroom.
Dale pulled out a tape from its box and scrambled to the TV. The VCR made a rusty-sounding racket as Dale rewound it. He looked back at me.
This is why I've called you in.
When he pressed the play button, a dark, warped-looking image appeared.
Look, there. Can you see it?
Yes, I see him. Within the grainy footage was a ghoulish old-looking man sat on a chair at the bottom of Melissa's bedroom. She was fast asleep in her bed while he stared at her hauntingly. He sat in still silence in the dark corner. Only his legs and face were made visible by the light coming from outside the bedroom window. The video was covered in obscuring dots from the TV static.
I've watched all of this. He doesn't move, he just sits there. I've checked around the house and nobody's here. And I've done all the usual background checks. Everything's normal. There's no signs of anything psychological and she's not on medications. She's all clear.
Dale turned to me for a response. I looked back at him and gave him a smile. Well, we need to find out what he's doing here then. Melissa, dear, I'm just going to have a look around. Do you mind? No, please do. And try to make yourselves at home, Melissa shouted from the kitchen. I walked slowly around the bottom floor of the house. Melissa's dining room looked just as beautiful as the living room. There were pictures of stables and horses on the walls. They were peaceful and brightly coloured, surrounded by finely carved wooden frames. It was a pleasant but brief distraction from what may lie ahead. I checked the laundry room, kitchen, and the bathrooms. The nipping at my senses was becoming more like a gentle stabbing now. Something in the air stirred with a hidden malice. I couldn't pinpoint it yet. Dale was behind me with his headphones on, holding one of his machines. All I could hear was a beeping noise coming from it. I caught his attention with my wide-eyed stare of innocent disapproval. He took his headphones off and returned. Dale, I'm not getting a clear indication yet, but I can feel something around me. The words barely made it past my lips.
It was upstairs when it started happening.
Dale whispered into my ear. Well, I'd like to go up there. I slowly turned back towards the living room. Melissa came through with the tea, which she placed down on the table and then nestled herself into the comfy corner chair. Dale and I sat down on the couch just to the left of her. At first, I thought I was going crazy and was close to seeking medical help. That's why I filmed myself sleeping. It sits in the corner of the bedroom mostly. I've heard a few noises downstairs, but it's not as bad as the bedroom. Her eyes glistened with a quiet fear as she shakily lifted the cup to her mouth. Melissa, if you don't mind, I'd like you to take us from the start. From when I moved in here. From when the haunting started, dear. Oh, okay. Well, it started about a month ago. I was getting these awful night terrors about an old man who would sit in the chair at the bottom of my bed. I noticed her hands shivering. Dale and I looked at each other. He started getting closer. Every night. First he was on the chair. Then he was stood near the window. And I couldn't move. I was frozen. I thought he would just go away. And I was having a bad nightmare. But then he came up to the side, my side, of the bed. After that, things just got worse. Go on. It did this to me. She pulled down her collar and rolled up her jumper sleeve and then removed the bandages. Her skin had been deeply cut on both her arm and neck. They were unmistakable claw marks. The dark red scars hadn't healed yet, and the wounds stared back viciously. We're here now, and we're going to try to help you. So please try not to worry, I said with a concerned smile. I can hardly sleep anymore. I'm too scared. I looked at Melissa, and she looked at me with an expression of plea. I want him to go away, she whispered desperately. I know you do, dear. We need to get him gone, and for good. Dale and I will make sure of that. My eyes turned towards the stairs again like they had been teased into the darkness. I stared back in a vengeful manner. I knew I had to focus. If this was all true, then I didn't know what to expect. Melissa had a 1,000-yard stare, looking physically tired and weathered. She delicately pulled her sleeve back down and her collar back up. Suddenly, the lights in the house started flickering slightly, then dimming, then flickering again for a few more moments before returning to their usual brightness. You could hear the electric sizzling in the bulbs as it happened. I turned and looked at Dale. Melissa whispered as she pointed at the chandelier swinging ever so slightly. "It's happening. Look." I surveyed the room slowly as Dale observed his meter. "Anything, Dale?" I quietly asked.
Could be an electrical problem.
"I'd like you to stay with Melissa. I'm going to take a look upstairs."
Are you sure?
"I'll be just fine," I hushed, smiling back at Melissa as she stared worriedly. I peered up the stairs again into the darkness, which was looking even more uninviting than before. "Where's your bedroom, darling?" "It's the first door to the left at the top of the stairs." "Thank you. I'll be back soon." Silence started to seep in as I walked up the stairs. Melissa and Dale were quietly talking, and I could hear him comforting her as I was enveloped into the darkness. I snapped on the light at the top of the stairs. The hallway appeared bare and eerie. Melissa and Dale's voice had faded away, and I was alone. I turned around to see Melissa's closed bedroom door, braced the handle, and turned it. The wood made a creak which could have woken the dead. As the door opened, I saw the old-looking wooden chair in the corner. The room still looked tidy apart from all the dust gathering. I figured she didn't spend time in here anymore, which was no surprise. I dragged up the courage from my heavy chest and spoke out. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I heard nothing. I turned around and left the room, closing the door behind me. The hallway felt cold, and there was a slight draft caressing my cheek. My footsteps echoed and bounced off the walls as I made my way to the next room. I opened the door and walked in. Meanwhile, downstairs, one of Dale's devices started to make a strange noise. It sounded like a muffled voice was quietly whispering into a distorted microphone. Dale held the device up to his ear as Melissa watched him. "What is that?" Melissa whispered. "Shh." Dale hushed. Back upstairs, I was looking through a few of Melissa's tidy spare bedrooms, keeping my eyes and ears open. My senses hadn't picked up anything yet. The rooms were well kept. She had lovely ornaments and furniture which pleasured the eye just like her living room did. Something in the air felt eerie, but there were no sounds or indications that I wasn't alone. I opened the door to Melissa's bathroom and switched the light on. Nothing other than the cistern making a hard dripping sound and the light flickering a bit after a few seconds. The bathroom felt bare and lifeless compared to the other rooms I'd seen. I walked back out towards the hallway and headed for the stairs. I couldn't sense much up here, but I wanted to know what Dale had picked up on one of his machines. It wasn't until I was halfway down that an overwhelming sense of fear seeped into my psyche. Something had its eyes on me. I quickened the pace. While passing Melissa's room, I heard a slight creak to the right of me which seemed to stretch and get increasingly louder. I paused. It was the sound of her door opening. I turned slowly and stared at the moving wooden frame that was accompanied only by thin air. I backed off and put my back to the wall with my eyes wide and lips tight. No one had opened the door. No one that could be seen. I made my way forward and quietly entered the room again. I looked around as my nerves felt electric from the still silence. "Who's there?" "We know you're in this house and I'd like to talk to you. Can you hear my voice?" "What's your name? We want to..." The loud bang made me jump. Whoever, whatever it was, it obviously didn't want me in here. My nerves were shattering. Then all of a sudden, the courage galloped back. "Why did you attack her?" I said in the harshest, most accusatory tone I could muster. 2 loud bangs gave me a clear indication to get out. I backed off out of the door slowly and veered off to the top of the landing to catch my breath. My hands held the banister tightly, and I dipped my head down and closed my eyes. My senses were being nipped at strongly now. I turned my head to see the open crack in the door, and it felt like an energy was trying to suck me in. I tentatively walked over and began to look from a distance through the crack. I could see an old man was sitting in the chair looking at me dead in the eye through the wooden slit. He looked horrifying, worn and diseased. My eyes squinted in ghastly awe at his condition. I gasped as I put my hand over my mouth when I saw his face and hands, which were riddled with boils and rotting flesh. His fingernails, long and black, and looked like crooked knives, hair that stood up on end like it had been electrocuted. The man wore a dark grey suit which looked like it had been washed a lifetime ago. "Who are you?" I asked through the crack in the door. "What do you want with Melissa?" I demanded. I inched closer to the door and took hold of the handle, keeping my eyes on him the whole time. "You should leave this house," I shouted. His loud, devilish voice sent shivers down my spine like water had been poured down my back. All of a sudden, he stood up and began thrashing across the room in my direction. His claw-like hands sprung up and reached out towards me. I slammed the door shut and grasped the handle tightly, pulling it towards my chest. I heard nothing apart from my heart pounding in my ears. After a moment, I slowly let go of the door handle, backed away towards the stairs, and began to walk down very slowly. My eyes were so transfixed on the landing above that I didn't realize I'd reached the bottom.
Is everything all right, Claire?
Dale asked as he walked over to me. "Everything is fine, dear. Just fine."
Are you sure?
I turned around and smiled at both of them. "Melissa, the chair in the bedroom. Where did you get it?" Her eyes darted around while trying to recall. "I took it off the woman who lived across the road in my old street. She was called Margaret. She moved away after a few weeks of living there. She told me I could take what was left, and I collected antiques at the time. She never did tell me why she left so soon. The presence may have decided to emerge when it felt closer to you, and maybe Margaret too. You having the vessel in the bedroom has given the entity an easy way to get to you. It's most likely used it as a mode of transportation." Melissa, looking unsettled, glanced at me with a concerned look to her face which grew ghostly white. "You see, dear, sometimes they find it hard to part ways with the living. I think it's been attempting to possess you. They will try to break your will and make you vulnerable, which is what it's doing to you. Where did you keep the chair in your last place?" "In the attic." "Then he may not have been close enough to get to you there. His energy must have been too weak. It could have been waiting to get close enough to you before drawing on your energy little by little over time, before attempting to take you. These things will bide their time before moving in on a target." Melissa stared in silence. "We can call our friend who is a specialist in this field. He'll take it away for you. That chair is most likely the entity's." Footsteps above made a low thudding bump on the ceiling, obliterating the conversation. The floorboards cracked and stretched as the weight pushed down on them. It startled us all. A vision, like a lightning bolt, crashed into my mind's eye. "I can see him. He's listening to us through the walls. He can hear what we're saying," I quietly muttered.
What are we gonna do?
"He wants us to leave." Dale looked more shook up than I had ever seen him before. His body looked like it was going into a survival stance while panting and shivering. Melissa didn't look much better. The sound of a door opening reverberated from the upstairs and floated towards us with a delay. It had us glaring up at the landing in anticipation, but nothing emerged at the top of the stairs. Dale looked at me and went all grey and bug-eyed. "He knows we've figured him out," I whispered through a weakly wry smile. Not even a second later, a loud, intrusive voice roared from behind me. Our screams filled the room with disturbing impact. I jolted forward in a stupor, then turned around. I was shivering and breathing hard. Dale and Melissa both stood panicked and distressed.
"It was behind you!"
Dale shouted and stuttered, pointing and shivering at where the spectre's face appeared. Terrified and feeling wide open like prey for a shark, we flocked together and scouted the room. No one was to be seen, and no footsteps to be heard. No voices. After about a minute of stillness, and not knowing which way to look, the lights dimmed slightly. An incensed flourish began to emerge which permeated the air, leaving a dull smoky mist throughout. Only the sounds of us panting could be heard. The room began to dim more than I felt comfortable with.
"What's that?"
Dale said as he pointed to the dim corner. "Oh God," Melissa said shockingly, as her hands began covering her mouth. One of Melissa's old-looking lamps was levitating in midair, and the plug lead swung back and forth. "Get outside," I whispered forcefully. "Now." We all sprinted for the front door. Before I reached it, I suddenly felt a powerful blunt smack to my back. The lamp had burst open and I hit the floor alongside the shards of ceramics that fell all around me.
"Claire!"
Dale shouted. He ran back towards me and pulled my arms up, and I was back on my feet for a second before my back started throbbing in pain. My legs started to keel over and down I went again. Dale quickly put my arm around his shoulders and picked me up and carried me towards the door. My head dropped back into the open air with no support, and I could see the living room behind him. I could see the old man stood watching us from amongst the dim and looming smoky light. It had a ghastly-looking smile on its face as we retreated. The very sight of him made you want to gag with that sickly, rotting look about him. "I figured you out," I shouted as Dale rushed me through the front door, the spectre now fading from my view. He ran up the garden path with me still grasped in both his arms and carried me over the road to his car. He placed me on the passenger seat as Melissa jumped in behind me and slammed the door shut. "Do you want me to drive?" "No, we need to fight it. We can get rid of it." "Dale, grab the black suitcase from the trunk. I need you to do something for me," I rushed, still sounding winded from the blow. He bolted out the car and started trying to open the trunk. His staggered footsteps echoed and clanged off the concrete. I could hear him struggling to open it.
"Shit, it's jammed."
Dale rushed around the side of the car and opened the back door. He took a metal bar from the back seat and then ran back to the rear. He wedged it under the trunk lid and forced the bar down with all his weight. The trunk swung open, which sounded like a snap.
"All right, we're in business,"
he exclaimed. He flung the black case into the back seat of the car, jumped in, and slammed the door shut. "Dale, look for a large jar of salt, the one that says Vallum on the label."
"Got it here."
He held it up in front of him. "Now take it and go around the outside of the house and don't miss any gaps. Keep that line solid,"
Just like old times,"
he said as he left the car and closed the door with a burst of energy. "Melissa dear, pass me the tape recorder and look for the tape that says Calare on the front." "Okay, sure. What's the salt for?" "The salt keeps the entity from escaping. It needs to stay in the house in order for it to work." She leaned over and passed me the recorder, and then I heard her rummaging through the case looking for the cassette. I could see Dale from a distance through the car window. He was already laying down the powdered barricade around the house. His back was bent over and he was sidestepping like a slow crab. "Oh, I've got it here," Melissa said as she passed it to me over the seat. I opened the car door, stumbled out, and made my way to the house. Melissa got out too and followed me over. I arrived at the front door, which was still wide open from when we fled. "Come on, Dale," I shouted. Dale was probably half around the house by now. He needed to hurry. Melissa and I stood looking down the left side of the garden, waiting desperately for the gate to be opened by Dale. We peered back through the door and the smoky mist could be seen emerging from the living room, making its way slowly to the front door. It was like a dark energy creeping up to swallow us all. "Dale," I shouted again. "Dale, where are you?" I heard him panting from the other side of the house. I saw that the bottom gate opened and Dale came barging through backwards and staggering. The gate made a clash as it hit off the side of the house. He was still taking his time on the powdered line.
Nearly there.
He shouted back. The sounds of footsteps could be heard gaining on us again from inside the house. "Dale, please hurry," Melissa screamed. The smoky mist was nearly at the front door now. I took the cross off my neck and held it up at the door, facing down the haunting mist that was swelling outward from within. Dale struggled around the corner and completed the barricade at the door.
That's it. Play it now.
He yelped. I crouched down to the concrete and pushed the play button. The tape had started to play, and I placed the cross on top of the machine before sliding it gently across the wooden floor of the porch entry. Dale slammed the door shut.
Lock it, Melissa.
She ran up to the door and took the keys out of her pocket. There was a slow mumbling coming from inside the house. The lock clinked, and then we backed away back down to the front garden and towards the street. "What's on the tape?" Melissa asked. "It's a sacrament," I said with a slight smirk. A louder moaning voice could be heard, muffled by the outer concrete. It was shifting its pitch around in an unnatural primal fashion. The lights flickered slowly, and the curtains fluttered from the other side of the glass. The moaning started turning into shouting and wailing. It was more forceful and desperate now. The lights began to flicker violently, and the curtains flailed and stretched tight, nearly being ripped from their railings. Bangs and clashes boomed behind the walls, which forced us back. The intensity in the air was enough to make us run back to the car. About half an hour had passed and we all sat quietly for a while longer, staring at the windows. We kept glancing at the madness that was unfolding within Melissa's house. Fabrics and items were being flung like there was an earthquake in there. Then suddenly, after a few minutes, it stopped, like nothing had happened. I turned to Melissa, but she spoke first. "Is it over?" she whispered. "Yes. Just about, dear. Dale, call Jason for me, will you? Tell him we have another item for his collection." Dale opened the car door and climbed out. "What did you do to him?" "The sacrament has scared him back into the vessel he's been latching onto. The salt outside your house kept him from escaping. It's only a matter of time until he comes back, though. That's why we need to get rid of the chair. Jason will find out where he's hiding." "Who's Jason?" "Well, Jason's the person we turn to when we come across objects which have these negative entities attached to them. He'll do a walkthrough of your house, and once he's run some tests, he'll get rid of it for you and cleanse the room it was in. Everything will be safe after that." "Oh, thank God. So it's over?" I noticed Dale was at the phone box reaching into his pocket, pulling out a bunch of coins which ended up falling all over the pavement.
Oh, shit.
He muttered to himself, which made me laugh. I opened the car door and stepped towards the front gate to take another look at the house. Melissa was behind me. I turned around. "Everything will be fine now, dear. I know it," I said reassuringly before turning back to the house. I heard Dale's voice buzzing from the phone box. He was reading Melissa's address out to Jason. I turned and looked at Melissa. She looked restless and agitated, like she had one too many coffees. She kept feeling her neck and squinting like something was tormenting her. "Are you okay, dear?" I asked. "My neck is sore. It's killing me. I need to redo the bandages." There's a first aid box in the glove compartment. Okay, I won't be a minute. She held her neck as she walked slowly to the car. Sympathetic old me felt absolutely awful for her. Who wouldn't? None of us really knew what she endured in that house. I think a holiday was long overdue. You know what, Melissa? I'll come over and help, I shouted over to her. All of a sudden, a slight shadow caught the edge of my eye. I looked over my shoulder at the front window of the house. Nothing appeared. After half an hour, we all decided to go back in and wait for Jason to arrive, and Dale wanted to quickly run some more tests. Melissa and I started tidying up some of the broken pieces of crockery that laid shattered over the floor, while Dale set up his equipment. The place was a complete mess. The beautiful furniture had been thrown across the room, and most of her ornaments were smashed. She seemed to take it pretty well. This is going to take some fixing. Well, I can help you with that, I said, as I picked up a broken shard from the floor. Are you fishing for a tip? She looked at me and smiled. Dale took a device through all the rooms in the house, marking down his readings on a large black ledger which had a piece of paper with rows and columns on. He looked like he'd make a good taxman. I noticed that Melissa's room was the last room he entered. He braced himself for a moment and entered the room, slowly, focusing keenly on the chair that stared back at him. He placed the end of the device on the arm of the chair and plugged his headphones in. It started to make a crackling sound as he turned the dials back and forth, reaching for a signal. He felt a shiver run through him and an itch on the back of his neck. The device started beeping abruptly.
It's cold as hell in here,
he muttered.
Good morning.
We turned around to see Jason walking in, and Dale came running down the stairs.
Jason, thank you for coming.
He said warmly, as he took Jason's hand and shook it. We walked over to greet him, stepping over the broken materials. Hey there, Melissa smiled. Great to see you, Jason, I said while shaking his hand.
Good morning, ladies. So, it's the chair that's been the problem? Yes, it's upstairs in the bedroom, I'll show you.
They both walked up the creaky stairs side by side, while Melissa walked over to her mantelpiece. I noticed a piece from Dale's machine had fallen onto the floor. When I went to pick it up, I noticed that it looked broken. I thought it must have been in the house when we fled, but I remember the make. 8 Tech. It looked like the one he was walking around the house with. Before I called for him, I glanced up the stairs. Something pricked my senses and stopped me from opening my mouth. I came to a halt at the grueling sight of Dale's right hand, held by his side, gripping his ledger. The skin was shredded, and boils were emerging like bulbs. His nails had become long razor-sharp talons and had turned into a mottled black colour that blended into the leather casing. They turned left at the top of the stairs and disappeared from my view.